Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Dilly, CEO of Awesome, and I am so happy to welcome you to today's cross-industry collaboration. I am really, really excited about this next hour. I actually made sure I had my pen and paper right next to me to take out kinds of all kinds of notes because I think that this topic is just so incredible. For those of you who haven't joined us before, this is one of my favorite sessions that we do in partnership with Deloitte. I really find them to be educational, where we look through data and analytics and brainstorming how we can learn together and create better solutions for our industry. And, talking about AI today, I know everybody probably feels like this is the topic that everybody's talking about. I feel like this is super timely and just a really great thing for us to be discussing. As artificial intelligence becomes more embedded into supply chain, from predictive analytics to autonomous decision making, it really is critical for us as leaders to understand not just the potential, but the ethical and responsible way of using this powerful technology. And it's really interesting as supply chain leaders to not only understand how we're using it, but how our teams are using it and really understand the exact application. So, through this interactive learning focus session that we have facilitated by Deloitte, we're going to explore the evolving landscape of AI ethics and responsibility through the lens of supply chain leadership. Our experts are going to walk us through the topics like data transparency, potential biases, regulatory considerations, and how to ensure human oversight. So it really is going to be fantastic. I was just at an event last night that we did in New York, and this was a hot topic that all of supply chain women were discussing. So I'm excited to continue this conversation and have our subject matter experts tell us more. So, with that, we have Nikki Yoakum, who is the senior manager at Deloitte, focusing on supply chain analytics and digital supply chain transformation strategy as our expert. So, she's going to enlighten us today with all the things that she knows. But as we begin this session, I'm pleased to introduce Michelle Davis, who's the Senior Manager with Deloitte Consulting. She'll be facilitating today's conversation. So, Michelle focuses primarily on the intersection of supply chain, network operations, and complex manufactured goods. She works in manufacturing strategy, network design, inventory optimization, AI smart factory capabilities, custom application development, and procurement within consumer goods, retail, and industrial industries. So, Michelle, thank you for joining. And would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And thanks everyone for joining. I'll just echo what you said. Very excited about this topic and very excited to bring Nikki with me here today. Nikki has extensive experience working both at the intersection of supply chain and technology. She's deployed large scale analytics and AI driven solutions across a wide range of functions, including large scale predictive maintenance programs. Spare inventory parts management, Industry 4.0, control towers, and she's a great leader in our supply chain practice. She recently also developed a point of view on agentic AI, which is some of the latest topics, helping our clients understand how to harness that power of the emerging capabilities to really transform operations. So, Nikki, excited to have you here with us today. Now, I'm going to go ahead and share screen. And then I think we're going to kick off with some polling questions. So we'll just put up our fun bios here. But Lauren, if you can help kind of kick off with our polling questions, that's where we're going to go ahead and get started. So our first polling question here, curious if your company has an ethical AI policy. And maybe it's you don't know, maybe not, maybe it's something that's emerging. And it looks like 60% say yes, but it's emerging, and some yes as well. This is great to see. This is really a leading practice. to have this organization and group that we can, help arbiter this technology. All right, and then I think we have a second polling question. Just a little bit about you, kind of what industry that you work in. That'll help us as we go through the topics. All right, so a lot of manufacturing after my own heart. CPG, some others as well. Okay, this is good. And then our last polling question, this is a fun one. Just wanted to think about based on how you personally think about AI, and it's often common to have some fears about it. Just curious if there's a sci-fi movie that best depicts your fears. We picked a couple examples. If there's any that spark your interest here, or maybe you're not scared of AI at all, and you can pick none in that regard. I love to see this. Yes, Terminator, Black Mirror, absolutely. Um, this is I think just a great way to start thinking about, this topic is not new, and the fear and anxiety around this is also not new. And so the way that we think about ethically and responsibly managing AI is, a good conversation today. We also want this to be interactive, so feel free to put some questions in the chat or come off mute. Just to take us through our planned agenda for the day. So we're going to spend the next 50 minutes together. We're going to talk a little bit of grounding on the landscape of AI and how we think about ethical AI, the different risks and the options. And then we'll also pivot into, how do we think about cultivating that trustworthy and ethical AI environment? We'll go through a couple examples. And then plan to leave plenty of time for some Q&A at the end as well, though please feel free to ask questions along the way. All right. With that, I'm going to kick us off here talking about just the landscape of AI. Wanted to make sure we were all grounded. So AI really is, it's a buzzword that we've heard for a few years now. It's reshaping how complex supply chains operate and how we as consumers and users engage with the tech and the world around us. AI is simply just the field of study dedicated to creating machines or software. The key is that that's typical. It's able to do human-like intelligence, so problem solving with many variables, understanding natural language, being able to generate ideas, things like that. And AI is not new. It's rapidly evolving, and you can see here, this is just a small snippet of the last 5-6 years. And if I had to say a couple of things, really the volatility and the frequency by which new technologies are coming out. We were just discussing like the latest models. Now there's new models and new applications coming out. It feels like every day, every week. And that diversity of applications really, to me, highlights both the vast potential and the growing importance of responsible AI, particularly as we've emerged from not just seeing things and having a machine do routine tasks, but as we grow into something more like agentic, which is where the kind of AI where you have an agent and they're usually specialized in some kind of skill or role. And then those agents can even talk among themselves. So maybe you have your maintenance agent with your scheduling agent, and they can talk with very little human interaction. So as we start to give more responsibility and more, power over to this AI, and we're letting it make more and more decisions in our businesses, this becomes even more critical. And so with some of the advancements of, computation, data storage, availability, it seems like consumers are becoming more receptive to adoption. It's really accelerated this across the supply chain. But we're still seeing some limits in adoption based on kind of trust or, too many places to get started. And so going to talk a little bit about that trust and ethical factors today. I think we wouldn't be remiss to say there's a lot of value potential for AI, and just saying this to underscore, like, there's a reason that there's a lot of hype around it, rightfully so. It's bringing a lot of faster, more accurate decision making. Supply chains can innovate rapidly, even down to helping generate, your personal meal calendar for the week, right? It's helping benefit personal and professional businesses. And I think that's why there's been so much attention on it lately. But as we think about scaling and growing this for the organization, just to tee this up, um, we've done some studies recently. Most of these are from our recent 2025 survey about the state of AI in the enterprise. And what we're finding is uh, almost all organizations, 94%, think that AI is going to be really critical to the future success. Yet there's still impediments to adoption related to the lack of trust, both on the tech and regulation as well. That's 6 and 8. And 33% of executives cite like lack of confidence in the results as part of Gen AI. So I think we're seeing this disparity where we know there's a lot of value. We're excited about the possibilities, but still some concerns in like the trust and the adoption and the way that we interact with this landscape. And I would be remiss to not comment that there's also regulatory impacts where this is just a sample, but there's several regulations that have been passed and guidance as well to help manage the risks posed by AI. So depending on how close you are with this topic, this is something that you may need to think about. Many executives worldwide are thinking about the regulatory barriers that may exist and will need to be reactive. And so a critical undermining of being able to respond is going to be that transparency and traceability through the model, which we'll cover a little bit too. So we're talking about like a very complex world with a lot of regulation, a lot of challenges. Maybe the last thing we'll say on like the risks and limitations. So this is one of our Deloitte frameworks for how we think about the different elements of risks or things that we need to get right in terms of AI. So we'll kind of take some time on this page here, but we see these 10 key risks or limitations. And you can see some of these are in terms of the inputs, in the way that we computate, and do the AI, work behind the scenes, plus the outputs that it has. So everything from, are we using biased data to train our model? Are we putting in the right amount of data to train our model so that it has something like meaty enough to work through? Even down to, is it something where that's malicious, where we can see maybe there's a bad actor who's able to come in, and we need something that's very secure, particularly if there's opportunity for this model to interact with your business and make decisions. We're seeing risks potentially in terms of cost. In most situations, it's almost a subscription or like a pay per ask. So every time you ask ChatGPT, and I remember, I think it was maybe last year, some article saying how much money is spent when we just say the word thanks back to ChatGPT, and the cost that can incur for your organization. The model performance, we're investing, a lot in the models. We needed to have the data and the inputs to create the great output that we want. So how do we make enough data or have enough data so that we're confident that it's trained correctly? Similarly, in that ethical design, how do we create and train it in a way so that it doesn't discriminate or doesn't spread malicious content? That it's done with the transparency, guidelines, and guardrails so that it gets the answer that we need, but it also isn't impacted with malicious content. Then one around confidentiality and privacy. This one's really top of mind, I think, for many like end users. Are you using our data appropriately? Are you using it with my consent in a way that we're pleased with? So one of the best practices we're seeing is having that model training data anonymized and cleansed, so it can't be traced back. Then when you look at the outputs, these next two around hallucinations, and hallucinations are just the word for giving the wrong answer back. So if you've ever asked ChatGPT for something and it gives you the wrong answer, sometimes it's really clear to see that no, 2 + 2 = 4, not 5. But other times, if you're less familiar, you may not know. And do you have the right information? And can you track down the source of where that information is from to confirm that it's factual? Similarly, with the model explainability, do we have that transparency? Can we trace it back? This is really key for something around regulation, where if we need to confirm, that the model is working in the way that we intend, and it's not uh, creating any issues downstream. And then the last column here around IP infringement, often we're using company data and this proprietary information, how you make decisions, how you organize, or it's even company data. How do we have that in a secure, safe environment? As well as many are using third parties. So when we introduce these vendors in, whether it's like a ChatGPT, OpenAI, or others, how do we make sure that they have access, but we are covered from like a liability and regulatory vulnerability perspective? Now, this is just a lot of risks out there. Curious if these are resonating with some of the things that you're hearing or feeling around the industry. A lot of these and how you're thinking about designing or using your AI. I'll kind of pause. Okay. We're going to get next into kind of how we think about managing these risks. Maybe as we do, there's real risks to not addressing these challenges when you're designing and developing and implementing. Everything from reputational risk, where you'll see in the news, chatbots learning racist phrases or really quickly going down very negative paths, or AI tools that accidentally disclose confidential data. This can harm your company's reputation and have negative impacts, even legally as well. Which goes into the nonconformance with regulatory policies, as well as the loss of human expertise. I know there's some concern, right, in the over-reliance on AI, and if we're using that too much, we lose our expertise, and then, as the workforce ages, are we putting ourselves in a position where we're actually hurting our workforce instead of enabling them with better tools? And maybe just to bring it to life a little more, we put these are two examples of companies using the same technology. These are both Gen AI examples, and sometimes getting it right and sometimes not. So you may have seen these in the news. Air Canada, 2024, early 2024, they had what is a really common use case of a Gen AI chatbot for customer service. And what happened was a customer, asked it a question about its policy. It was about its bereavement policy, asking, is this covered, for example. The Gen AI bot incorrectly said back that it was covered when truly the policy was that it wasn't. And then when that customer went back to Air Canada, it actually was escalated through the legal system, where the customer was frustrated about the money that they lost, a lot of backlash and customer anger. It was in the news, where it felt like Air Canada was failing to take that responsibility, and a lot of debate around our customer rights versus AI hallucinations. So not a positive outcome for Air Canada or that customer. But then on the flip side, something where it's using very similar technology of Gen AI, Spotify creating, their AI playlists, right? Their Gen AI playlists. And so this was from, I think, the end of 2023 with Spotify Wraps, where it was the first year where they added the AI DJ blend. And this is one where customers really loved it. They trusted it, they wanted it, and it got them excited to interact with their tool a little bit more. And so as we think about some of the differences here in how they actually manage trust, our Air Canada, where there wasn't the human intervention or the model wasn't trained in the correct way, that led to a negative outcome. And really, where we're seeing companies go is having humans with the AI, particularly now to start. Potentially in the future, humans become less in the loop. But for now, it's humans with the machines, not against the machines to create that. And in order to do that, we need to build trust and a secure, positive environment. All right. With that, any other comments? I think we're going to transition here to talking about how we do that. But any comments or questions before we do?
Michelle, are there any stats on where the information is coming from for each output answer?
Can you say more, Jacqueline, about like where things are coming out of from like the main LLMs?
The main data sources, I'm hearing more and more that some of the data sources originally were documents, but as more and more people are leveraging AI, that more of the learnings are coming from what I would say are not trustworthy sources. But so I wondered if when you do an output for something crucial, is there a way to backtrack through the system when there's an error like what happened with these two examples? Is there a way to backtrack through of what were the data sources or the information nuggets to create the answer so that it can be addressed most effectively?
Yeah, and I think I don't know the balance off the top of my head. To your point, definitely know that they are putting more, opening the aperture a little bit of what they're allowing to be trained for. I think one of the general best practices as we start to get into the conversation around ethical AI is ask it to cite your sources at all times, kind of so that you do have that. And that's actually even, you'll see as we go into this framework, we know this is called the ethical AI session, but that transparency and trustworthiness is really what allows you to see, to your point, tracing back to where things may have gone wrong and making sure, as Michelle just mentioned, you have the human in the loop at the right points to ensure that ethical use too.
Okay, great, helpful.
Any other questions? That's a great one, Jacqueline. And I know that's why, at least what I'm seeing more is as companies create AI tools and solutions, they're often doing it only on their own data, like sequestering it separately so that they can control exactly what does go in and also control and manage that the IP and regulatory component.
Yeah, that is a really good point. And I think there's like there's this concept called RAG too, where they're basically, especially on like a chat GBT type interface where you get an original answer, but then you ask it to almost check itself against more of the open source data so that you're almost getting two pieces of information, whether it's on the initial training data that maybe has been sequestered, but then like go out and check online, just as long as your data is not as a part of that, but as another way of understanding the context around it and any other information that's relevant.
Nick, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. And yeah, I think that question, as I mentioned, was a pretty perfect lead in to where we start thinking about the structure of how to actually make this actionable and something that can be implemented in the organizations. Again, I think the ethics of it and how you think about what is ethical or not, a lot of companies already have that code of ethics and what it may be, but to make sure that is mapping now to this new world of AI, really a lot of the focus of what we're talking about here to make sure that that is still included and enforced in a way is around that trustworthiness, transparency, and just making sure that that is truly a part of how you're setting up the use of these AI tools. So I know in supply chain, we're already used to balancing complexity, trust, resilience, all of those things. That same then application applies to AI as a new tool itself. So the three areas that we'll really dig into today around that is how do you design a thoughtful operating model to make sure that that is the expectation and is tracked throughout your organization. How do you make sure you have the right governance in place? And then also, how do you implement the right technology enablement itself? So I think each of these concepts, again, aren't net new, aren't something revolutionary, but it's really about how you start to think about applying them in this new world of AI. So for example, just as a little bit of an overview as a start, the operating model side of the house, clear roles and responsibility, who owns what, how decisions are made, where accountability sits is also a big part of that. So again, even back to the example of tracing back what happened, who is that person that, really, or who had the role of making sure that those answers were correct or in line with policy. And if a mistake was made, that's fine, but like, let's figure out the implications and where that is going. But that starts to really create the foundation for ethical use, just to make sure it's applied fairly, responsibly, and in line with the organization values itself. So again, we'll deep dive into that one a little bit further after this. But then in terms of risk governance, so kind of that middle column, I think as Michelle had mentioned in her earlier statements, there's a lot of risk that is introduced with the use of AI. I think that is something that everyone is aware of. There's biases in models, the regulatory scrutiny that's mentioned. So there needs to be that governance in place and make sure that there is those checks along the way, kind of across the board. And so we'll talk about ways to do that as well. Again, not necessarily a net new concept, but making sure that that is in place from a foundational level as AI evolves so quickly will help that scaling as well. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the tech enablement also. So when paired with governance, you can actually use a lot of the technology that's being developed today to embed some of those safeguards within the models and the systems itself. And so while it's not just a compliance exercise, it's making some of those choices where you want to use technology, where some automation may be appropriate, but then also where human judgment is also essential, and you want to make sure that you have that. But just to create that interaction, also just help companies get their arms around how much AI development is being done today. Tech can be a good helper in that standpoint as well. So ultimately, across the board, we're building these trustworthy AI capabilities, not one-off tools or not some of these small tiger teams. I think especially that we saw occur a lot when AI was just getting started, but trying to make sure that we're establishing that foundation where ethics is central to all of it. And then as that is also carried through change management, knowing that as people are starting to get more comfortable with these AI tools, that there are clear expectations in place and trainings as well to make sure that they're clear on how and when they should be using different tool sets. So with that, we'll again jump into each of those three itself, starting with the AI operating model. And so what we've seen in a lot of cases, and where especially as there's kind of the race to get the AI use cases out and ready, everyone wants to take advantage of all of the benefits that have to go with AI. So there's a lot of this idea of the development process along the way, where there's this big funnel of the intake. Let's get the ideas out there, see where AI can be most effectively applied, and then start to narrow down with approval gates. How do we then actually pick the right ones that we want to invest time and money in? But one of the risks of, depending on how this is set up, is whether people have been told or get excited about AI, but they either try to circumvent the process and do it on themselves with some experimentation, or along the way, if some of these approvals take too long, and again, if these kind of different ideas start to drop off, and we get this shadow AI is one of the things that we call it. If there's not a clear expectation set in place and there is just this intake process itself, a lot of times these other use cases start popping out. And that's where we start to leave room for people who aren't really following the process. If there isn't just kind of baseline expectations that are set in place, that's where organizations start to be exposed to some of the risks of unethical processes, because there isn't just that overarching structure of everything that is AI needs to follow these guidelines. Everyone gets these trainings, and we kind of go through it that way as well. So the process itself, I think, is a good one, but there needs to be that overarching operating model that is controlling it, and that expectations are set still clearly across the organization. So if we go into the next slide, kind of with that, some of the things that we've seen and lessons learned that work really well. I think a couple of things to keep in mind as you think about designing an operating model that supports AI. One of them is around being agile with it. It needs to be adaptable. Again, this is a pretty quickly changing space, but how do we create almost a set of experts across the board of that can really start to be really tasked with understanding the right and new things that are coming up at any given time, whether that be on the functional side, the technical side, the risk and legal side, making sure that you have people that are intentionally tasked with understanding the latest tools and risk and regulation. And then the next one with empowering teams with accountability. This again goes back to that who is accountable for someone making these decisions, knowing and clearly articulating that, AI told me is not an acceptable answer. You have to like have that, understanding as a worker and as a participant in the process, that you are still at the end of the day the one who is the human in the loop and needs to be kind of watching out for some of these areas of drift or concern or ethics that could be there as well. And that starts with the bottom one also, with creating that buy-in and standards at all levels. So making sure that, senior leadership is championing AI and it's great, but also that everyone throughout the organization is really trained on the best ways to use AI. So that's where even if some of that shadow AI starts to happen, there still is that very clear expectation and training that you are supposed to be using it in XYZ ways. And there is that expectation that, when you do go to ChatGPT, you cite your sources, or when you do use a new model, you have these checks in place, and that it does need to go through some sort of approval process, that we can't just be using AI for everything without some sort of understanding of what those ways are to use it both ethically and efficiently, so that you also aren't just running up cost from that side of it as well, across the board too. So one of the ways that we've seen this work as well, with a life sciences organization, is they created this AI governance council, COE. Again, I think something that's been used across the board, but that's really so that as there is this evolution across AI itself, making sure that there are people, again, distinctly tasked with understanding the new evolving environment at any time. There's going to be the people that, really know the new compliance and the legal part of what's going on, but you can't expect your entire organization to know that. So how do we have someone that is really looking out for that and spreading that across the organization and understanding how things need to change because of that? And then making sure that any of the execution and any of that library of use cases that is going on, there is at least some sort of intake and awareness process that is going on, just so that there is the balance of innovation with risk, but that visibility and transparency at least is there, and can be helped along. And again, I know this kind of goes back to the funnel a little bit, but if there is that overarching policy, there is a group that is dedicated to training people on it. It helps to manage some of that. And then also we'll get into tech in a little bit of how that can also help streamline some of these processes. But the really important part is making sure you have an op model that is ready and flexible enough to support what is coming down the pipeline. But I'll pause there if there's any questions on op model, comments, if anyone's seen other best practices they want to share. Definitely willing to chat through it.
I think I just want to add something here, that the last bullet point here is the reward the teams for adherence to governance standards.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've seen is the companies rewards a lot, like, okay, let's experiment with AI, let's use it, let's show me the money. But really, I have not seen so much about the adherence to governance standards. Of course, we have these cybersecurity practices, and if you do so and so, you are recognized. But I think that has not been so thought or so applied to these particular topics. So I really like how basically we need to reward. You need to put the incentive to follow the governance, because if all the incentive is to show me AI, show me the money, I want efficiencies, of course you will find lots of those things. But this is a very good one.
Yeah, it's a great call. And I think one even examples, I think to your point, where everyone's, I love the like, show me the money and like, let me see these use cases, like go in and break things. I think even as like there's been a lot of, like hackathons or like things where, or even kind of like try out all these use cases in some sort of like mini competition so we can see the best ones there. Even adding as part of that rubric some sort of idea of like, how do we make sure that this continues to be trustworthy, or and even in like a very applicable case of like, you built this AI use case and this model that does all these great things to help with, maybe it's just get back in finance going in a much streamlined manner. And you also had a model on top of it that was at least then monitoring model drift or something like that, that at least like kind of adds that extra layer as an understanding that like, you can't just like have this model and like throw it out and let it go wild, but you do need to have some sort of kind of backstop or at least way of tracking and creating that transparency in the process too.
Hey, Nikki,
I
I have
love
a
it's like
question for you. It's Michaela. This is really insightful. I wonder, as you guys look out in industry today, what would you say, how many companies have like an AI governance council, or where are we on the maturity perspective of how many folks have put something like this in place?
I was pretty
Yeah,
surprised actually by the polling result that I think we had like 70-80%. Um,
But we're the overachiever crowd on this.
well, that's
So
it. That's it.
it's high.
'Cause
Yeah.
Um, oh my God, Michaela, I literally looked at this number this morning. Honestly, I feel like it was like less than 5% in like the S&P 500.
I believe it.
That number is probably 6 months out of date, so it's probably a little more now, but it's emerging. It's emerging from what I've seen. Like in my experience, what I've seen organizations do is kind of Alejandro, what you were describing, where like we're just going to tell these leaders, like, go figure out something. And then they're starting to get some scale and realizing like, oh, wait, actually, like in order to scale, we actually need this kind of governance process. So I think it's newer. I think this crowd is a little more mature than I expected, which is great news, and great kind of knowledge sharing throughout. Nikki, not sure what you would add or share a different experience.
I would agree. I think the fact that we're having this conversation again puts us in that little bit of a group that's thinking about it a little bit more. Also, the example we have here is, it's a life sciences company, which tend to be much more on the regulatory side and having to think about it. So I think even some of the other sectors probably are a little less concerned. It's more of like they need to get that AI case on the book, show that they're using it, but not thinking of those wider implications that then seep out even in some of the examples Michelle was giving earlier. But agree,
That
it's
was going
not
to
like
be my question
unfair.
if there were certain sectors that were further ahead. So obviously life sciences because of the regulatory, but are there others that are kind of leading the charge as well?
I don't know if Michelle, you have a perspective on that. I kind of have seen it's following regulation, and then there's just things like the CPG examples we gave earlier, where it's
Yeah.
not as regulated, but it's having these impact on customers that are more visible. Or also that's where I think things are tightening up a little bit more because of the visibility there, and so it's kind of happening in different ways for different reasons.
I was going to say almost that exact thing. Yeah, that I think it's the life sciences and then the consumer side, primarily even on the customer, not even on the supply chain itself, but just all of this engagement with, the AI with your consumer. Good
Do you
question.
think the government has a policy like this for their own use?
Within the government.
Yeah.
Or yeah. I mean, I would say it's pretty. I know Michelle had the slide earlier with like all the countries with different regulations. Like EU is known to be one of the stricter ones. US is, I think, still trying to figure out some of those, and like so states have even taken it on. So like if you're in California or Colorado, I think there's New York, I think is the other big one. It even changes within the country itself. So like there's some policies, but they are changing, and I think it's something we can't expect everyone like, if we're doing a predictive maintenance use case, I'm not expecting all of the maintenance managers to be up on the like latest regulatory trends, which is again where this council comes in place. Of if you're scaling a solution from the US to globally, like you're going to run into different things and different data regulations that are just changing quickly, and it depends.
All right, great dialogue. Should we move forward? I think the many companies have different trust and ethics frameworks, so we wanted to share ours as a starting point too. Thinking about, okay, what are the things that we need to make sure are key tenets as we're building it out? So I think as you, as leaders, are advising on those use cases or helping drive the direction of the company, like these are different elements that we would recommend you consider. They cover all of the similar risks that we were talking about earlier. We want an AI model that is private, it's accountable, transparent, and explainable. Back to the earlier conversation. It's also reliable, and robust, that we can actually get the answers we need. Fair and impartial, removed of that bias. Has to be safe and secure, based on user protections, also cybersecurity, and then also responsible if it's socially conscious as well. So this is a framework that we use and we share, and would recommend if this is something you don't have, this is a good starting point. There's a few others out there that are similar topics. Each of these, it's kind of a tiny text here, but the outer bands correspond to those 7 boxes on the right. And then within each, what are those elements? So when it's transparent and explainable, I can justify, it's interpretable, it's auditable, and it's visible. So the different key kind of sub elements within them. I think more excited to bring them to life. So as you're thinking about how we ensure that we're creating the environment, like these are different attributes, that we can pressure test our systems and our use cases in. And wanted to share some examples of, based on different industries and a AI use case, what are the different, some example different considerations. So as you kind of think about, like, this is the business value use case. For example, I'll use consumer, where it's a item assortment planning, and it's an optimization. So, the AI is going to predict and it can adjust the assortment based on, trends that it's seeing in the market. And then putting your trust and ethical hat on, thinking about, all right, what are the other considerations, thinking back to that wheel. So one example here is just, okay, if something is mismatched with customer demand and then we have too many things on the shelf, then who's accountable for that error? What are the costs, the consequences, basically that kind of side of it. So some other examples here too, but just would encourage, like, as you're creating the use case, thinking about, based on the wheel, what are the different things that we should be checking and making sure that it's private, it's transparent, it's accountable, and responsible as well. These are some actual use cases as well, like the life sciences example with patient engagement. So like a language processing, so it can understand, medical data and information. Well, how do we make sure that's secure if that's your HIPAA data? Who has access to that information? What are the consequences if, it gets it wrong? And then it tells the patient something incorrect. So, some different ways that we see this come to life, and then would encourage through that process, the governance process that Nikki was describing, make sure that we're challenging it appropriately with these kinds of considerations and not just with our business value hat. All right, keeping an eye on the time, I'm going to keep us moving forward. Nikki, do you want to talk about the tech enablement as our last piece? And then we'll have some time for Q&A.
Yeah, so last piece of all of this is the technology side. So using tech to help you with tech. But there are a lot of different solutions or applications out here that do have this in mind. And there's kind of throughout that intake process that I spoke about earlier, there's different places that there should be kind of some of those checks that are going on along the way. And there's different technologies that will help you see some of that. So starting with the intake itself, like, is there a way to do risk assessment on the potential use cases that we're even considering? How do we control even what is coming in itself and make sure that there are those checks as early as possible? And then once there is that identification of a place that we want to go and we implement, how do we, again, even just some of the questions that Michelle was just posing, like how do we make sure we have the right approvals, but also the right accountability for what is happening itself, and how do we make sure that that's tracked along the way? And then finally, as it is in place from a monitoring and reporting standpoint, what systems are in place to continuously monitor for risks if things start to shift or drift or things change, and making sure that there are some of those dashboards too that you can also use as a visibility tool, just to ensure that things are going well and as expected itself, as well. I think we can actually go into the next slide, which gives some tangible examples of what that looks like. And I will say across the board, a lot of systems and a lot of, whether they be the ERP systems, cloud systems, a lot of those different areas and providers are building in modules or use cases that have some of this trustworthy stuff built in so that you can do some of this continuous monitoring. So some of it may already be available based on your tech stack. Some of it may be something that you look elsewhere for, but there are ways to at least kind of look at certain aspects of the way that you're deploying AI and see how things are going and make sure that you are creating that layer of visibility across the actual actioning that is happening by a lot of your AI type of applications too. So a couple of different ways that some of these safeguards can be put in place is from a content filtering perspective, making sure that where there's prompts going through as people are using like a Gen AI application, if there is anything that they're start to see violate company standards, because it is all going into a company database, making sure if there are any indications of toxicity, anything that goes against ethical standards, kind of having that check in place as well. Use case tracking, how people are actually using them, the traceability is there, prompt logging and monitoring, making sure that people are able to refine it correctly, access controls like any other technology, making sure people who are going back to the training and accountability, those are the people who then have access to use the tools. It's not that anyone in the organization can use it without training. Reliability monitoring, I've alluded to that one a couple times too, of making sure that, especially from a modeling perspective or even an agentic perspective, as these different AI applications are going out and actually implementing decisions, whether they're providing recommendations, making sure there is visibility in place to see if they start to drift in terms of what they originally intended to do, even if they start producing different results, kind of always looking back to the baseline of intention, is definitely something that should be something that you're keeping in place, so that again the models don't kind of start to change too distinctly just with the passage of time and as they're trained on some of the other areas that is going well. And then fact checking, this is the one I mentioned earlier too, ensuring that there's ways, whether it be through policy of ensuring sources are cited whenever you get numbers from ChatGPT, or whether it's an actual modeling technique as well that is ensuring that there is like a second check every time, just before things start to hallucinate, and which can even be from a bad prompt, but there is like a secondary check that is involved there too. So a lot of these things, again, they're tech solutions to a tech problem, but it is a way to help get your arms around just the amount of development and use that is going on across the board as things evolve. And again, a lot of these do exist and are available in a lot of native systems. It is just about ensuring, kind of going back to the governance and the op model, that it is the expectation that some of these are in place, that people are using them, that they're able to be deployed. And it is kind of an expectation that as you're going about this, that you are having some of these safeguards in place and use the technology available to do so, but ensure there's accountability to check it as well. And that was our last slide, at least of content. Again, wanted to go through each of the different areas of op model, risk governance, and tech enablement as it goes through how to really think about institutionalizing the trustworthiness, the transparency, the ethical use, but did want to at least leave some time at the end for any questions that you also have. I think also opening it up to all of you to share if there's any best practices or things that you've seen work either really well or learnings on the other side of the coin. I wanted to open it up to the group here at the end.
I just want to say I appreciate the perspective, the realizing how few companies really have the kind of governance policy in place. I think it's good coaching. I guess I think about
Mm.
where I am. We're really early days for most of the companies, but everybody is just like we all are, I think, personally dabbling and looking for value creation use cases. And um, I wonder a question, and maybe this is more technical than you wanted to talk about today, but like when a company has their own internal chat GBT instance,
Mhm.
um, I even wonder like how do I log out because I want to ask it something medically about me and I don't want to, it's so it's not open source to the whole world, but like what is I don't know, any insights you can share with us about as companies have created those environments, how to think about that and how to navigate that most successfully?
Yeah, I think it goes back to like the usage code or what you're trying to actually, whenever you give someone an enterprise ChatGPT license, do they know what they should and should not use it for? Because I think to like, your personal information that does go into then your company's sequestered area of data, and just at least making sure that people know that, and also the expectation, depending on how it's asked to be used. Like if you don't want people, because it costs money for that question, if you don't want your team members to be using it for that, like again, just making sure that that's laid out clearly.
Mhm.
I think to your just overall point, like there's so many people that are building the plane as they fly it, and I think the idea of this conversation is to stop and like check in, create the FAA, if you will, but like, do we need to like create those standards of use and make sure that that is well understood and trained across the company?
And Nikki, you can even train the model to not answer those kinds of questions. Like I know, so Deloitte has, we have like a very similar, like it's ChatGPT, but it's for Deloitte. So we can have our data on there and it's secure. And I think it allows me to ask any question, but it will tell me, I'm here for professional use and like I'll answer a professional question if you have anything about like business and work. And so I've got to imagine that you could, like, if you wanted to set up that complete guardrail, do that. But
Yeah.
just to your point, understanding that it is going somewhere and understanding like what the company's going to use that data for or how long they're going to store it, can at least give you an informed decision on do you use your own personal instance versus like the company ChatGPT, for example.
Yeah, that is a good example. It goes back to the content filters too.
Mhm.
Just try to play with Sidekick more.
All right. Any other comments? Also, I know we're coming up on time. Really appreciate it and the dialogue throughout. And thank you, Nikki, so much for sharing your expertise too. I also find these sessions really enriching just to hear what's top of mind, how other companies are thinking about it. And I'm really grateful you chose to spend an hour of your day with us today.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It was a really great session. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Nikki.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you to both Michelle and Nikki as well. I thought that it was outstanding information. There's so much out there and things are moving so fast. I almost think, can we do a follow-up session with if you're just starting out, like how do you start to build this for companies? Just because I think that there's just so much, like you shared so much great content. I'm just blown away. I stopped taking notes because I realized that
I
I'm
love them.
actually going to get this presentation. So everybody,
Yes.
we will be sending out this presentation to you after the event with the survey. So take a look in your inbox for that. But I was sitting here thinking, like, can we like do a follow-up with, kind of like a how to, if I'm just starting out and scratching the surface, and what's the easiest way to kind of to put some structure and governance around in a low risk way. I don't know if that's valuable or not. I think it would be, but we can talk more about it
I think
later.
it could be great. I think the other thing, be curious if other folks are interested in is like, do people want to share their best practices of like the use cases they found to be like really helpful, either in your personal,
Yeah.
like your life or your professional life, what you're seeing? I think that could be really an edifying discussion as well.
I think you're right. Sharing the use cases, it would be really interesting. That's a great suggestion. So,
Hey, I
Yeah.
have a fun one to share that I think would be great. So I had a fortunate opportunity earlier this week to be with one of our tech guys and for an hour. And he said, okay, I'm gonna live do a mentoring session for you. So he said, and we're in our internal company chat GPT. He said, tell me a problem you're working on right now. And I'm gonna write a chat GPT query prompt for you that would so we did that live. So I told him, well, I'm trying to understand why if all of our companies buy all this packaging, why don't they buy packaging materials from one of our companies that sells packaging materials? And I had the data that said how much everybody bought. So he says, okay, put this into the chat, blah, blah, blah. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I want their sales team to come up with a strategy of how they can engage these other companies. And again, think about it. They're all part of our same, I'm in private
mhm,
equity, so they're all part of our portfolio companies. So we have the ability to get them an introduction. Not that we would make them buy, they have to have a competitive product, blah, blah, blah. Well, in a half an hour, not only did we go through him the creation of the prompt, we had both an entire sales strategy for how the sales team could go engage with these companies, including one of them didn't make any sense. And so we corrected the model to say, well, this one doesn't really make sense for this reason. And then the model comes back and says, oh, thanks for the input. I'll extract everything else. And I was like, to see it live happening like that would be so amazing, I think, for other people to see it. Cause like for me, it was a
mhm.
big wow moment.
It's incredible. What a
Yeah,
great use case. Very powerful.
that is. Michaela is the chat GPT and Kristen French, they're great chat GPT queens. Like they're always pulling out chat GPT in our advisory board meetings. So I love it.
Great. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
And look forward to seeing you all again at another event in the future. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye bye.
For now.